Hello everybody, thank you so much for joining me for this session which has been put on by Mental Health First Aid England and Thrive London. My name's Becky Talbot, I'm one of the Mental Health First Aid instructors. I'm an associate with Mental Health First Aid England, and I teach on the adult courses, the youth course, and also the higher education course. My background is I'm a fully qualified counsellor and life coach, and I've worked in education and the charity sectors for a number of years. I worked at the University of Leicester for 10 years as their mental health advisor there, and I also worked for Women's Aid and in mental health groups as well. I've done quite a bit of work in primary and secondary education also. So hopefully you're all here to enjoy this workshop, which is looking at using your mental health first aid skills, with a particular focus on our young people from LGBTQIA plus communities. So I really hope that you're going to enjoy this workshop. I'd like to thank some of the key organisations who've really helped me out with developing this workshop. Can't name you all, but definitely Stonewall, a lot of the resources have come from yourselves and Mind as well. But I will be sharing with you towards the end lots of different resources when we're looking at the other support. A little bit about myself and my identity. I do identify as a bisexual woman. But there's much more to my identity than that. I'm a mental health trainer, I'm a mother, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, I'm from a working class background, and I also like to do a bit of spoken word writing as well. So if you don't mind, I might just share with you now just a little poem that I wrote about my early experiences growing up and how really that impacted on my mental health. And of course, if you don't want to hear a quick poem, you don't have to, just fast forward through this one if you'd like to. So, they say my mum's a lesbian, but I don't know what they mean by this. I think she's found a woman that she wants to hug and kiss. But Playground says it's not okay. Playground says it's gay. When I ask them to a sleepover, they're not allowed to stay because my mum is gay. I say, don't worry, she's not into kids, but their dad, he don't agree. And before I know it, all the kids have naught to do with me. They say I must be a lessie too, and they'll come nowhere near to me. So I'm out of the group, then I'm out of the town, because anything but straight just isn't allowed. And it'll be 30 lonely years until I'm out and proud. So that's a little bit about how kind of my childhood shaped me and how that added to a lot of the mental health problems that I've experienced through my life. And as we know with mental health, there is always that hope for recovery, and I have mainly recovered now, mostly towards the top left hand of the continuum. And of course, the homophobia and harassment that I experienced wasn't the cause of all my mental health problems, but it was a significant impact. So I think this is a really important topic for us as mental health first aiders. Before I get going properly, I should just say as well, this isn't my usual medium. I'm not used to just talking to a camera. I spend most of my time facilitating groups, so do excuse me if it's a little bit clunky, but I hope you do get something from this workshop, everybody. Oh, okay, right. Our course aims, what would you like to get out of the course? So we're going to start off by just exploring, having a think about that acronym there, and making sure we're clear about what some of the key identities our young people might have. And really have a think about that, the idea of the stress container, if you remember the stress container, and how actually for our young people from LGBTQ plus communities, I will abbreviate it to that if I may, just for brevity in this session, from LGBTQ plus communities, how all those extra stresses are coming in on a daily basis, and things that we might not, or other people might not even realise, that we might take for granted, privileges that we might take for granted that people from such groups just don't have. Okay, and how that inequality and exclusion really does impact on negatively on our mental health. But we'll also see the opposite of that, how with support, encouragement, validation, visibility, being ourselves, as we know, can just be the best thing for our mental health, having a sense of belonging, being allowed to feel comfortable within our own skin. We will be having a look at the practical application of LG as well, honing in on what important things are within the approach there, also about the listening and how we communicate and listen non-judgmentally. And I'll be looking at kind of ways in which we can give information and support, what that is, and also how to encourage the professional help and the other supports. So I hope that's going to be helpful for you all. And then across the board, what we want to be looking at is actually using this term allyship. You know, if we don't belong to one of these communities, the A sometimes does stand also for ally. We can be an ally, and we all have that responsibility, don't we, to make our environments mentally healthy for all. It is there within the Equalities Act, and of course, when we have a mentally healthy environments for all, we have productive and great learning environments as well, don't we? And that good sense of well-being for everybody. So I'll share a few ideas with you on there, and then throughout I'll be referencing access to further sources of support and resources. And I do want to say on this point, there may be charities and organisations out there that I haven't mentioned. If I haven't, I fully apologise for that. There's so many. I have handpicked quite a few of them, but if you're not listed within those organisations, you will be signposted from some of the top organisations from their lists as well. So hopefully this is a fully inclusive course. I've done my best to do that, but any apologies if I have missed anybody out. And inspiration as well, like who is there for inspiration for ourselves and for our young people. So hopefully that's helpful for you all. By the end of the session, hopefully we'll have expanded maybe our understanding of the key identities with the LGBTQ plus communities, be confident that we can use that LG to support our young people. And as I said earlier, knowing what is the correct information to give and support, and how to do that as well, importantly, I think, and what are the professional helps are out there and other supports. And all the way running as a golden thread throughout this, really practical ways to promote equality, inclusivity and visibility within your organisations and communities. So, okay, so that's our outcomes. So to start off with, what I thought we'd do would be quite useful is just to explore these key identities. And what I invite you to do, as I say, I'm not used to doing a format like this, but I will just invite you to pause me, if you haven't done so already, just pause me when you're ready, just to take part in this as an activity. So I'll ask you to just kind of write down now, if you would, those letters there, and just from your current knowledge and understanding, what does each one stand for? And come up with a definition of that. So if you can do that for me, I'm just assuming that you're going to do it, that you're going to pause me and just do that little activity. I think it can be useful just to have a think, what do I know already? What do I currently know? And then the resources, the information I'm going to share with you right now are all from Stonewall. And you can happily click on that link there, which gives you a full list of glossary and terms. So the full list of all the different terms, because many of these terms are umbrella terms, and people may well identify under different terms. So it's important if you want to have a look at all the expanded list there, which again, thank you so much, Stonewall, for publishing those as well. So if we start off with looking at the L stands for lesbian. And this is a woman who has a romantic or sexual orientation towards women. So the first thing I want to point out about this definition, and it surprises me actually, because even recently when I've asked people like to define what a lesbian is, they're talking about sex, a woman who has sex with other women. And again, and we know, like within straight relationships, you know, we know, yes, there can be sex involved, but it's about romance, it's about love, it's about relationship, isn't it? And it just kind of swung me back into my childhood, where people were making this assumption, if your mum's a lesbian, she's going to be fancying me as a child, you know, just all these actually awful homophobic things here. So remembering it's about romantic or sexual orientation and about love, perhaps a woman who loves women, yeah. And also importantly to know that some non-binary people may also identify with this term. More on that a bit later though. And when we look at the word, the term gay as well, the G in the acronym is often referred to a man who has again a romantic or sexual orientation towards men, a man who loves men. But it's important to note that many lesbians do prefer the term gay rather than lesbian. So it can also be a female. So making sure that we are aware of that. And remembering some non-binary people may also identify with this term, which we'll come back to as well. Okay, the B is bisexual, so often shortened to bi, isn't it? So that's an umbrella term that if we describe ourselves as romantically or sexually orientated towards more than one gender. Now, I'm going to explain this in a bit more detail because there is a little bit of misunderstanding sometimes and controversy around this. Yeah. Bi people may describe themselves using a wide variety of terms, so we're looking at it as an umbrella, but I'm just going to pick out one of those terms now, which is pansexual. Okay, so I think for some people, the origins of that word bisexual means two genders, doesn't it? It means people attracted to people of two genders. But absolutely, for many bisexuals, that doesn't mean that. It means more than one gender. But for that reason, some people will choose to identify as pansexual. And the term pan, again, is actually more focused on all as well. So some people feel the term pansexual is more inclusive of people with non-binary identities as well. Okay, so I hope that bit makes sense to you. So in terms of bisexuality, we will see later that there's lots of different myths and misunderstandings, and also higher levels of prejudice as well, and more difficulties with coming out. So it's worth having a look at some of the resources that I've posted towards the end of this presentation to have a look at some of those myths, and even things around Mind have done a really good guide about how to support someone who is bisexual as well. So I think that's a really good idea to have a look at. And remembering when we're talking about sexual and romantic orientation, that this runs along a continuum. We might see this, it's not necessarily static, and it can change throughout our lives. And of course, it varies amongst different people. So it's very much about being led by that individual, by that young person, really having that, really good mental health first aid skills of listening, communicating non-judgmentally, getting into their frame of reference, and remembering that, mental health first aid is not about putting people in neat categories or boxes or diagnosing or labeling people at all. We can't do that. Yeah. So we're looking at supporting that whole young person. Okay, and looking at the T, trans is the umbrella term again, which is where we may describe if ourselves as trans, if our gender is not the same or doesn't sit comfortably with the sex we were assigned to at birth. Okay, so that is an umbrella term, and within that, again, lots of different trans people may describe themselves using a wide variety of terms, and I've added quite a few of them on there. What I would say is, again, if you had a look at the glossary of terms there from Stonewall, that will give you really good definitions of each one of these. But the important thing is that we ask the young person how they identify, okay, and are able to, really respect that person's identity and mirror the language that they're using there in terms of trans. And having said that about gender, I will invite you now to, I hope it's not going to play, don't do it. Okay, I will invite you now just to have a look at this TED talk. Absolutely amazing young person talking about their experience of gender. I mean, how on earth someone so young gets to be so confident in presenting. It's about 10 minutes long. I would really suggest that you have a look at that. They ask some really key questions about gender and why it matters to us what gender people are, and came up with some brilliant ideas there. So I would definitely recommend having a look at that. So I'm just going to try and move this on without playing it because it might try and play. Yeah, it has. Sorry. Right. Okay, that's worked now. Sorry. Okay. So hopefully you've had a look at that video, and it's really kind of helped shake up our heads around our thinking around gender. I think that's really amazing video to have a look at. Do feel free to share that, of course, as well. It's fully available. So moving on a bit more now to looking at the next part of the acronym, which is the Q. And the Q has a couple of different meanings. One of the meanings of Q is for queer. And lots of my friends and friendship group within the LGBTQ community do identify as queer actually is becoming, I was so shocked when I first heard this term, because, you know, being a woman of a certain age, that word to me was really, really laden with like abuse and bullying, and a terrible word, that, you know, really bad connotations for me. And some people do still see that, actually. Some people do still feel that, which is totally valid. But others have now reclaimed that term, and many people I know will identify as queer. And that, you know, for many of those, it's their way of rejecting the specific labels around romantic orientation, sexual orientation, and or gender identity. So would identify much more as being queer. The other part to the acronym of Q is questioning. So again, this is relevant for all of us at any time of our lives, actually, but is that process, but could particularly be more so for young people. And that's a process of exploring our own romantic sexual orientation and or gender identity. So that is the Q part. Moving on to the I. The I stands for intersex. Maybe some people might not be as familiar with this term. So I have put a link on there, which is from an organization, US organization called the Trevor Project, and some really good information there about intersex youth as well. But generally speaking, it's that umbrella term where we to describe variations in physical traits or reproductive anatomy that are present at birth or emerge spontaneously later in life. So really, this idea that we are born with either by sex as female or male is actually untrue. That there are lots of people who have variations in their physical sex traits, and that those people would sometimes be identifying themselves as intersex. And then the A's will stand for aromantic or asexual. Sometimes this is shortened to ACE, actually. Some people may shorten that to ACE. And again, this is not, sometimes people misunderstand and think this is about not having romantic attraction or sexual attraction to others. But it can, again, be on that continuum. So we're looking at, it might be little or no. Yeah, and some people can be aromantic and asexual, or they can be one or the other as well. So again, it's being led by people's identities and how they are defining themselves. So a little bit more there about asexual, you'll probably hear first, but I tend to use the aromantic because I think we do kind of, you know, speak a lot about, you know, the sexual attraction, and rather than looking at the whole person as in the romantic and the love as well. So I think that's really important. So, and even within those terms, you'll see there that there's variations within there, such as demisexual, and you can have a look at those on Stonewall's site as well. So I think we've got through with all of the alphabet there, and I hope that's helpful. Just to have that defined. Another term that you might come across, which you probably do come across, is that term cisgender. And that's kind of, you know, some people refer to this as non-trans, but that's if our gender identity is the same as the sex that we are assigned to at birth. So that's called cisgender. And it's important we know that term when we're looking at inclusion as well. Come on to that in a little while. One thing, you know, that is really, really important to state around this, so we've said, you know, about what all these different terms mean, and we've said, you know, it'd be led by that person, but one thing that often happens is that we focus then just on that. Yeah, that we focus on just, so for example, with my frame of reference, yeah, my sexuality is a part of my identity, it's a part of my window on the world, it's important to me. Yeah, but so is my gender, and my age, and my work. For me, a lot of my, you know, my main, in the middle of that window of the world, there would be around things like socio-economic background, place of birth, you know, challenges that I've had with my own mental health. They all come into my identity. And so what we really must be always remembering, and I'm sure we do, mental health first ages, is that, you know, that sexuality and gender identity are maybe part of that person's identity, but it's a whole person there, isn't it? It's that whole person. And we will be thinking a lot about intersectionality here. So where if there's several layers of inequality in one person, you know, such as race, ethnicity, gender, we will experience even more inequalities there, and we'll have almost like a double whammy. And I have put another video to for you to have a look at on the next slide. And this is from a group called the Twilight People, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And I just love the way they're talking about a minority within a minority, and that's very much thinking about different cultural differences, different faith groups, etc., and the struggles people may find to find belonging and sense of community and acceptance within those groups. Having said that, it is a big myth that people, from LGBTQ plus communities cannot have faith. That's absolutely not true. And there's lots of work being done by some really brilliant organisations. And again, at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to look up those organisations and find one specifically for the young people that you are working with. So there's lots of really specific resources, guides, support lines, support groups, even loads within that. So I would say have a look at this minority within a minority video, and that kind of can really help us to understand the double layers of inequalities and stresses that might be coming into our young people's stress containers. Okay. So exactly that. So if we remember this, our stress container. So we're looking at our young people will have all the similar stresses to their peers, but they will have additional stresses there, and we'll see in a moment or two. Sorry about my clock going off there. We'll see in a moment or two, how that really does impact on some of the statistics in terms of people's mental health, and that's again another reason why this is a really important topic to be clued up on. In terms of intersectional stresses, the things that can be coming into our stress container, if we are LGBTQ plus and a person of colour, we may not feel comfortable being open about our sexuality or gender identity because we're already experiencing racism and discrimination, invisibility, all those things as well. So it's another layer. So it may again stop us from being able to come out or be open about our sexuality or gender identity. And also mentioned earlier around faith communities that may have a harder time coming out, and there may be different views, there may be rejection. We don't want to stereotype again because we know that some groups are really inclusive as well, but it's really important to say that it can cause problems within religious communities as well. So what we'd be asking our young person in terms of the other supports is about your community. Tell us about your community and your family, and how supportive are they. So we're trying to get into what supports are there for that young person and any barriers that might be. Then we can be signposting onto these brilliant organisations that I mentioned earlier, such as Twilight People, who may be able to help and support that young person. Other intersectional stresses could be around socioeconomic background, poverty, huge issue, isn't it, at the moment as well. So double layers of stress onto that young person there. If people are living in a queerphobic environment, might not have our young people might not have the financial independence to move on. And the same, within workplaces, a bit more probably this slide is a little bit more aimed towards adults, but it's really important to know that, there's not an equal playing field there, is there, around, depending on our level of poverty and financial independence. So we talked about socio-economic class, but there's also other minority stresses that all come into this stress container. So if somebody is growing up in care, or indeed or is a young carer, this adds on to it. English as a second language, even for our young people, again, such a focus on people's appearance, body shape, body size, huge different impact that any pre-existing mental health problems, family structure as well. So lots of different layers of privilege or disadvantage coming in there. And I've just popped this one up for you here, where it's a little bit of converted a quiz about checking our privilege. And I'd invite you just to read down there and just to see if any of those apply to you. Are we able to easily find role models of the, same sexual orientation or romantic orientation, gender identity? Are we there? Do expressions in everyday language reflect our gender? Oh, the postman's just come. Hello, boys and girls. That Audrey said on that video. And if we're not from a binary gender, all our language is so binary, isn't it? Yeah, it's so binary. I often think about this. I think, well, what's we can say, like, with our children, they're a son or a daughter. Yeah, we say they're a son or a daughter. And then if they're young, we might say child, but what when they're adult? Someone who's non-binary. It's interesting, isn't it, that our language isn't quite there yet, I don't think. Are we able to be open in public and be affectionate with any partner without fear of threat or punishment? That's a very real thing. We'll see a stat on this really soon about the number of hate crimes. Yeah. Are we able to, discuss relationships within our family, our friendship groups? Do we have to hide? Are we able to post on social media? Do we have that representation in media, or is the media representation all very, novelty, trivialized, and fetishized? Yeah, and quite frankly, can we go about our life without fear of harassment, bullying, abuse, or hate crime? So let's have a look now at some of the statistics around this. So we're going through a quick quiz here. Who's more likely to be out about their sexuality? Just again, you can pause me for a moment and just write down the answers to this if you want. I don't even know if anyone's even listening. Hopefully you are. But yeah, who's more likely to be out about their sexuality? Gay men, lesbians, or bisexual? I was surprised by this, actually. The least out group, the group that find it most hard to be out, is bisexual men, followed by bisexual women, then followed by gay men to lesbians. So that's quite stark, isn't it? When we look at that, 30% of bisexual men aren't able to be out about their sexual or romantic orientation to any of their friends, to anyone. That's absolutely huge, isn't it? And I would invite you just to have a think about biphobia and what is that about, and have a look at some of those myths around bisexuality and think, why is there even higher layers here of discrimination for bi people? There shouldn't be discrimination for any of us, should there? But what's that about? I would invite you to have a think and do a bit more reading about that, actually, from some of the resources that I will share with you. And then, as I was referring to earlier, how many of us have been the victim of a hate crime? Stark. So I just moved myself so that you can see that properly. Yeah, 2/3 of people have experienced anti-LGBT violence or abuse. Yeah, so there's no wonder that we have this link with poor mental health, which we'll see in a moment, isn't it? And this really needs to change. The impact of that. We think about the link between fear of violence and abuse and anxiety, for example. It's absolutely huge, isn't it? Staggering figures, some of these for these stats for this quiz, isn't there? And we know, don't we? Young people and bullying. Yeah, the risk of bullying for young people drastically increases their risks of poor mental health. It drastically increases their risk of suicide. I regard it personally, it's my personal opinion, I regard it as a child protection issue. How much more likely are LGBTQ plus young people at risk of bullying? Again, it is absolutely stark. So they're twice as likely to experience bullying. So almost half have been bullied in the last year. Absolutely stark, isn't it? And next question, and I know the recent guidance which came out in September 2020 around relationship and sex education, but some of the research is showing still that only 1 in 5 people have been access to relevant sex and relationship education in relation to same-sex relationships. So again, I'm sure lots of you are doing loads of work on this, and I'm sure that's not the case where you're working. But yeah, this is what the recent evidence is showing us. A little bit of I thought there's some myths around this about, particularly those of you working in, with primary and younger people, but just going to state it plainly as, the stats here, that, 1 in 4 people first thought they were LGB, age under 11, and that's growing up to 40% for trans. Yeah, so you young people are thinking about and questioning their romantic orientation and gender identity at a young age. So I'm sure that does mirror your experience as well. And I've headed this a matter of life or death because I just cannot believe some of the stats on here. Again, this is from the Trevor Project, all these stats for the quiz actually. And you know, it's absolutely stark, isn't it? You know, first thing that I notice when we look at that, and again, it is a US study, but you know, straight youth, in terms of straight youth, 14% considering suicide in the past year, and 6% attempted suicide. I mean, you know, it's just absolutely stark, isn't it? But that then skyrockets up to 19% and 37% respectively for gay and lesbian youth, and then skyrocketing up again to 48% again for bi young people, and 27% attempted suicide. You know, absolutely huge, isn't it? And then the Trevor Project again found that amongst trans young people, again, this goes even higher to 2.5%. 2 to 2.5 times more likely to experience depressive symptoms, consider suicide, and attempt suicide compared to their cisgender peers. Yeah, and that is compared to cisgender LGBTQ peers. Yeah, so that's important, isn't it, as well? So, however, what I want to really, really point out and really labour on this slide, and I think this is such an important thing, having just one affirmative person in their lives reduces this risk of suicide by 40%. And, you know, you may be that one person, you know, as youth mental health first aiders, I'm sure you've saved so many lives over the years that you've been doing the work that you've been doing. Yeah, but just having one person reduces that risk by 40%. And I know from my own life, I had one affirmative person in my childhood growing up, just one actually, really. But I know that's I could have been on a very different trajectory had I not had that person there. Okay, thank you, everyone. So what I'd like to just invite you to have a think about now is, sorry, I'm just going to keep moving me. I hope this is coming out okay, this recording. Can you think about a scenario regarding a young LGBTQ plus person that you know, and have a think about how you would currently use that LG to support them? I think that's a really helpful thing to do. And so just pause me and then have a go at just kind of developing your own case study, and bring out your youth books and go through that. But just think about, is there anything additional that you might think about or want or need to do when supporting that young person? So just pretend you've done it now. Okay, and I will now give you a bit of a reminder of the LG, of course, if you haven't got your manuals or workbooks there. And then I will just say a few things about what I thought in terms of what specific things can help. So on the approach, I think a really important point, and I've seen this go wrong a few times actually, is to not make assumptions. I was working in an organisation once, and somebody came to see me, and they'd been to see a counsellor or a GP or somewhat, and they were really struggling to engage with the help that they were getting. And the reason was, every time they went to see somebody, the person made the assumption that they were there to talk about being trans. Yeah. But trans was part of that person's identity. They had all the other stresses and strains that were going on in people's life and all the other problems, and they just made that assumption. Yeah, and it's almost like when we make the assumption when we're working with someone around, like perhaps the area of self-harm or substance use. Oh, this is the problem. You know, I diagnose this problem. This is a problem we're going to work on. But we don't. We come back to our young person in the centre of LG, don't we? We come right back to that, to the heart of it, and not making those assumptions. However, we do want to make sure we do recognise when we're assessing those stark figures that we just looked at and the stats there, don't we? And that we are recognising that there is an increased population risk here, so an increased risk, and there is also often an increased risk around substance use, as it would be if someone is experiencing, you know, the bullying, harassment, discrimination, invisibility, exclusion, ostracisation. You know, people do tend turn to whatever they can to try and help them cope. So there is increased risk around perhaps drug and alcohol. But as with any mental health first aiding, you know, what we would do is working with the individual and looking at individual warning signs whilst being aware in the back of our mind about the risk as well. Okay, it's really important that we do respect that person's privacy and don't ask invasive questions. So we're asking those open questions, but not trying to, and always kind of proceeding with, is it okay to ask you if, you know, and not invading that person's privacy is really, really important, as is clearly and kindly explaining the limits to confidentiality. So this means following the guide of your, you know, the organisation that you're working with, following that safeguarding procedure, but being really clear with that young person what the limits to confidentiality are, and perhaps giving examples of that, and just thinking and being really clear in your head about what do you need to pass on. So I think sometimes the temptation can be to pass everything on, and if that is the policy and if that's what you need to do, that young person needs to be aware of that. So, you know, who is within that confidentiality loop? Yeah, especially if they're talking about really such private matters, such as romantic sexual orientation and gender identity. Yeah. And our aim, as always, is to involve and empower the young person in receiving and in exploring what support they may well need. Okay, so. Excuse me. In terms of, I just need a minute. I'm not used to talking for this long. Yeah, in terms of listening and communicating non-judgmentally, of course, we come back to frame of reference and being really sensitive and you know, being curious but not being invasive about their frame of reference, asking those open questions about that. It's really helpful that we are summarising what we think that young person's saying. I know that's a skill that we use anyway in mental health first aid. I'm not sure if you, on your course, whether you talked about the LEAPS model, where we listen, empathise, ask open questions, paraphrase and summarise. That's the LEAPS model there. And having that tentative summarisation or tentative reflection, paraphrasing back, can be really helpful to check out any misunderstandings. So what I think I hear you're saying is, for example, is that right? So what we say at the beginning, what we say at the end is really, really important. Yeah. So to check that out, is that right? I think I'm hearing you say, and then the bit in the middle, so they can come back then and correct. And that's really important when, you know, we are talking to people who may have, you know, a multitude of different identities and preferences for how their identity is described. So we need to kind of make sure that we are getting that right, really. But if we do make a mistake, you know, we're not perfect, you know, and just being able to own up to that. I'm so sorry I got that wrong, rather than just trying to ignore it or move on or pretend it didn't happen. Just kind of hold our hands up, can't we, and just say, yeah, I'm really sorry I got that wrong. You know, we do our best efforts, but understand that, you know, if we go back to Audrey's video, if you watch that, you know, they were really clear, weren't they, around, you know, I don't want to blame, you know, I don't want to blame you, I don't want to shame you for getting things wrong. So it's much more about kind of really just being kind to that person, but also kind to ourselves. So that's our listen and communicate non-judgmentally. So in terms of giving the information and support, again, very similar to, you know, with all of these, it's all what's on the action plan anyway, but just other things to consider on top. Being led by the young person's need and not trying to fix. This is what we get into quite often, isn't it? When we're hearing somebody in pain, we do want to help. We want to take that pain away, and it's just having that patience to do the listening and communicating really, really well, not hurry it, and not trying to fix the situation. In terms of giving information and support, it's asking. I always say this: we ask, don't tell. Ask, would you like any information from me? What support might you need? Yeah. How would you like to proceed? And then thinking again, sorry, just going to move myself again. Thinking again about who might want to be involved, yeah, and just exploring that kind of larger support network with people, and recognising that different groups do have different concerns. Thinking about that intersectionality again, And I've put in there's a really good resource from the Trevor Project, which is the guide, the coming out guide. I really like it. I think it's aimed at young people. It's very user friendly, lots of good tips in there, very practical as well. So it might be about asking that person, would you like to have a look at this? That could be something that could be really supportive and a life-changing thing actually to have a look at. So do have a look at that first and see what you think yourselves. So giving support and information can also be around more generally, how do we create that supportive environment? And we mentioned this earlier, didn't we, about thinking about gender inclusive language as well. Hey folks, rather than boys and girls. And then there's a video that you can have a look at as well. It's coming up on the next slide as well. Inviting role models to talk to people, and sometimes we think role models have got to be famous people or people who've made it big or whatever. But this next video I think is lovely to have a look at, because I think, they're just a normal young person. They're just a normal young person, and just talking about their experience, and they're talking about, why we should have the need for. Oh, hang on. It'll come up in a moment. It's gone in the wrong place. But when you get to that video, that they're talking about the need for inclusive education as well. So it is kind of having to think about that support, not just on the individual basis when young person might be struggling, but how can we prevent a lot of these, a lot of the problems from happening in the first place. So, having that allyship, we often call it as well. You can be an ally by displaying positive symbols such as rainbow lanyards and badges. You can make sure that we are using pronouns, which I think, and respect others' pronouns. Make sure there is all that accessibility there. I can remember in primary school, all you'd read, every story had mum and dad in it. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, where's mum and mum? Things are getting better now, aren't they? But making sure that is across the board in all the environments, in the library, in our materials, on the curriculum actually, and in virtual learning environments as well. I've just said that around making sure we have an inclusive and representative curriculum. If we look back, actually, this is, it is changing, but some of the case studies, if anyone did the adult course, they are really all very cisgender, aren't they? And they're all very, we had some of this feedback, and that is changing now, but it just shows how we just really need to keep going and moving on to make sure we are being inclusive and representative of all identities. Making sure, of course, we've just missed Pride Month. I was a bit late doing this presentation, sorry, put it off a little bit, but not Pride shouldn't just be a month. We need to be taking that, on a daily basis, making sure that is working. But when we are having a Pride Month, that we really do go big with that and make a really good celebration, but also education for that. And there's a really good other resource that you can have a look at there. Sorry if this is a bit small, by the way, but hopefully you'll be able to see that the Stonewall has got LGBTQ inclusive education, everything you need to know resources there. So have a click on that. So that's a lovely resource for you all as well. Sorry, here was the video that I wanted to share with you. Hopefully that's not going to play on its own, but yeah, this young person's, I really admire how they're speaking. And again, I couldn't imagine myself doing that at her age, but she does it, and I think she does a really good job of that. So please do have a look at that. And that's what I'm talking about, allyship, being able to have positive role models coming in, the young people's voices to be heard, which I'm sure you're totally on board with that. Oh, no, I don't want to play it though, sorry. Okay, yeah, and encouraging the appropriate professional help. So here I have, I've got a couple of slides now with not all, with a lot of the different support networks that are out there in organisations. And as I said at the beginning, I'm really wary that I haven't missed anybody out. But if you're not actually on this list, you will be on a list that's provided by these people. So some of the main ones that I've been focusing on today have been Stonewall. A lot of the terms have come from Stonewall there. The Trevor Project, which I said is the US-based one. The Twilight People as well. And another good resource, which I really must mention, is Gendered Intelligence, which is absolutely brilliant. And if you want any more specific, more in-depth training, than just this introductory session. I really, it's particularly around trans and trans rights, gendered intelligence is really, really good as well. So do have a look at all of these organisations which provide different resources, helplines, lots of additional training if you wanted to go a little bit further with this. So I suggest you have a look at these and see which ones you think are going to be most valuable to you. We've also got, again, we've got the mix. So some of these you'll already be familiar with as well. So the mix, Young Minds, again, absolutely brilliant. And they have got specific guidance and support there with in terms of gender and sexuality as well. There's a good list there of organisations that you should know about for people of colour. I think that's come through from Stonewall. There's a meta list, I think they're calling it there. So that's a really good one. And of course, Mind have got good support tips as well. In fact, if you want to just have a look at, just a really quick one, if you had a look at that Mind one there, that's got just some really quite nice concise information as usual with Mind, but lots of signposting as well. So as well as LGBT Foundation is there. It's got lots of good resources and doing brilliant campaign work. Okay, so sorry if I've missed anyone out. I hope not. Okay, talking about encouraging the other supports, let me just move me down again. Okay, so I put in the corner there those 5 a day for mental health first aid, and I think that is really, really important that we are coming back to those, because it's just such a really good opportunity to go through actually who is in that person's corner, who are they connecting with, are they isolated, what are the ways in which they can connect. And indeed for all of these 5 a day for wellbeing, it's a really good model for just if you're working with a young person, talking to a young person, just going through what do you like to do, when you're being more active, what sort of things do you like to do, and asking again, not telling, asking, and getting that whole picture of that young person so that we are providing that support. So we're asking about who's in their corner. Perhaps they might want to be interested in joining groups, whether that's online or face to face with other like-minded people. That could be an option, but I'd be asking them, would you like information about that? How do you feel about that? And just ask what they love doing. What's your thing? What do you love doing? There's so much, great work out there around art, music, film. I've got a few resources for this in a moment as well, but having a look at that whole person, having a really creative approach to those other supports. So hopefully that's helpful. Now I've put on here some Instagram accounts, but with all of these, I've got just a couple of Instagram things and also some box sets and books and things, but please be mindful of the age group that you're working with. So you will want to check these out first yourself, and then have a look and see, age related, whether they'll be suitable. But there's just a few ideas there that some people helped me come up with there. I'm not really into like the social media myself, so but it's just that's where a lot of our young people are spending time, isn't it? So and then a lot of these, I think I've watched all of these, but again, it's that representation, visibility, isn't it, as well? Not all of them will be suitable for young people, but do have a look at some of those as well. And it's good education for ourselves as well to kind of expand if we need to. We might not need to, but expand in our frame of reference as well. And even some books there that a couple of friends have recommended. So the legal framework to this, as you will know, is from the Equalities Act. So that's 2010 Equalities Act. We have a legal duty not to allow bullying, discrimination, harassment on any of those protected characteristics, and romantic sexual orientation and gender identity on there. Okay, we have that duty there, 2006, to protect our young people from bullying and homophobic abuse. So it's there in statute, it's there in law, and as mental health first aiders, of course, this and the link between this and poor mental health. But I do want to highlight towards the end of this presentation that the big difference that we can make, and that for our young people, having one person who's affirmative there, or hopefully in an affirmative environment, can make a huge difference to people's life. And when we are able to come out and be our true selves, and have a sense of belonging. Goodness me, isn't that just what human beings need? Isn't that just what we all need to be able to be comfortable in our own skins, to be able to be ourselves, to feel supported, to feel accepted for who we are, and to feel comfortable, and that sense of belonging and inclusion in our environments, wherever they are. So I really hope that you found this information useful for you. It's been very weird for me just speaking to myself for like however long it's been, but I have finally done it. I hope you found it useful, and well done to mental health first aiders. Please do carry on all the great work that you've been doing, and never forget what difference you make in our young people's lives. So thank you very much for listening. If you have, please do contact Mental Health First Aid England if you need any more information. If you were signed up to the course on Enably, nip on there, you'll see there's loads of other resources that are popped on there for you as well. But all of the links on this slides as well will be really useful. And if you've enjoyed this presentation workshop, please do put your thoughts here. If you haven't, put your thoughts there as well. But yeah, please do give us some feedback. That would be absolutely great. And thank you so much for listening, everybody. I hope you found it helpful. Bye.